Here's a quick blurb about me. I've been using SQL Server way too long, also version 6.5, so don't use that version anymore if you're still using it. I'm also one of the organizers for Atlanta SQL Saturday. I think I have a slide later, but in case I miss it, our next event will be April 20th. We also just announced pre-cons. If you're interested, you can go to SQLSaturday.com, and that should be the only current event for Atlanta. We just recently had a BI event this past weekend. I'm not really on Twitter that much anymore because it frustrates me. But if you have any questions, my email is sql_r@outlook.com. And this is just a brief history of what I used to look like. I kind of still look like that once in a while, just a little bit older. This is a little bit more recent. And this is me, thanks to Pure Storage and their AI people and all that. And that's how I'd prefer to look, but I can't afford the diet. I think I would just starve to death. A little more about me. I will hopefully make these slides. I'll email them to the user group leaders, and you'll be able to read this stuff. It's kind of not that interesting, really. It was for my employees at my new job. Here's some of the presentations I've done in the past. If you might have heard of some of them, some of their history here. I'll leave that there. You could take a screenshot real quick, and then I'm going to change over to the presentation. And I thought I'd start with a definition about what is metadata. And I got this from a dictionary somewhere, and it's a set of data that describes and gives information about other data. It's data about data. And in the context of SQL Server, metadata gives you information about how your server is configured, how your databases are configured, how your tables and columns are configured. So basically, the information that you would query from a table can be queried about the table, about the database, and returned as tabular results. And there's a lot of facilities in SQL Server to give you this metadata. It will save certain information on disk. It may save information only in memory. For instance, locking information is only kept in memory. Certain performance characteristics are only kept in memory. But you can query them as if they were tables, and they would give you results in a tabular format if you want. So you can get some information about the structures of your tables, your columns, and all that, and you can use that for auditing purposes, documentation purposes. You can extend that to, again, server configuration. If you have to audit, say, for instance, you have to do a security audit. In other words, who has permissions to certain databases and other objects. You can also go beyond just table definitions. You can get index definitions, stored procedure or function definitions. You can also get information about administrative tasks like backups and jobs if you're using SQL Agent for jobs. And there's also some performance metrics. You may have heard of the dynamic management views, DMVs. They have information about how often your stored procedures run, how long they take. You can also get execution statistics on individual SQL statements if you're not using stored procedures. And hopefully I might, if I don't have time to demo that today, I'll have the scripts available for the users, and you can contact me if you had any follow-up on that. I'll first start with showing you some basics on database schema, metadata, things that you probably already know. I'll probably go through this fairly quickly because it's fairly well known, and it's something that you can test pretty quickly with just the basics on these information schema views. So for those that are familiar with the information underscore schema, and why that did that, I don't know. There we go. So I have a view that gives me information about tables, and it's just pretty simple. It gives me the name of the database or the catalog, and DBO is the table schema, the name of the table, and whether it's a base table or whether it's a view. And it's just very basic. This just tells you what you would see under basically the tables view here, or the views tab under here. And you can get it all in a query like this. And all of these results are things that you can just basically click and select all of this. You can copy it, and you can paste this into, say, Excel if you needed to document this in a tabular format. I'll skip the routines. Well, let me show you real quick. This gives you information about stored procedures and functions. They're just known as routines, but it gives you their name. And I think if we scroll over here a little bit, does it tell you? It does not give you, it does give you the definition. So if I wanted to script out all of my stored procedures and functions, I could actually get that from this column here. I could copy it. I could copy this and paste this into a different file as a script, and now I have all of my code. And there's other ways to get these routine definitions for different objects with different functions. You can also combine these information schemas. You can connect the columns view. I can connect my columns to my tables and only give me the columns within my tables, but I can now see each table, the names of the columns, what position they're in. If there's a default value assigned to it, you'll see the definition of the default. As you can see in column default here, I get the data types. And if they're character data types, I'll also get, sorry about that. If they're character data types, you'll also get the length of the data. Scroll down a little bit. So here we have an nvarchar 50 for these tables here, for these columns within this particular table. I think, let me see what else is in here. This one's very interesting. If you work at a place that actually puts constraints on their tables, like primary keys and other handy things, you can get information about them through the table underscore constraints view here. So you can see I have, I think it gives you the type of constraint here. We have primary keys that enforce uniqueness. We have check constraints to enforce other conditions. And I don't think the constraint definition is in here. There should be a demo later that would show you that. And I'll leave these for now, but this is the older style way of doing things. Microsoft has moved on to a different structure that allows them to expand this as they add features and allow them to document tables and other objects that might not be covered through the information schema view. Any questions? Nope. Okay. I'll go on to the next. So in SQL Server 2005, they added this SYS schema that you see here for system, and now it allows Microsoft to add as many different system categories, types, whatever objects, and they can simply place them under this SYS schema. So those familiar with AdventureWorks, you'll know that they have different schemas for different parts of the business, such as sales, human resources, and person, and so on. So you'll see a lot of AdventureWorks objects that have a two-part name, which would be the schema. Not all of them belong to the default TBO schema. So sales.salesorder_detail would be the way to query that table. And from there, I can go and look into sys.objects, and it selected everything again. I didn't want it to do. Bear with me. I'm using a touchpad. That's why my coordination's not so good. So here I have all of the system objects within this particular database here, and I had them ordered by the type of object they are. Let me move this over here so you can see more of this. And alphabetically by type, I have check constraints first, and these would show me any check constraints I have on tables. For instance, things like end date, status, birth date, gender. Some of these might come up later. They enforce constraints, or they enforce conditions on certain columns, like your date of birth for an employee. They have to have been born at least 18 years ago. So there's a constraint there. And I can see all of the types of constraints here. There's default constraints. And I go a little further down, foreign keys. And at some point, there'll be something that's not a constraint in here. Internal tables that I don't think you can access these. Primary keys, and then scalar functions, and then stored procedures, and then triggers, and system tables, and I forgot to filter these all out. And then finally, we get to user tables. There we go. So you'll see the typical sales, sales is down further, but we have the address, bill of materials, and so on. And these would be the objects that you're familiar with by name. The schema ID you can link back to here. And yep, I actually did that in this query that I should have just run instead. Here we go. So now I get a better feeling for the actual objects and what kinds of things they are. So here are functions, stored procedures, the full name and the schema of the objects in question, what kind of objects they are. So all of the tables are listed here and so on. And the views are also listed here. So you can join these system views, in this case, sysObjects and sysschemas, and this gives you a fuller definition, similar again to what you might see in the Object Explorer. And there's also some refinement. You can view just tables and just views by querying this sys.tables view and the sys.views DMV here. And you get similar data that you saw from sysObjects. So it's really just a subset of what you get from sysObjects. Let me see if check constraints actually has the check constraint definition here. I think it might. Let's see. Here we go. So I have actually, for the check constraints, you'll see this particular constraint says the freight has to be greater than or equal to 0. You can't have negative freight on your stuff. The sales quota is greater than 0. So you can't be a deadbeat salesperson and sell 0 during the month. You have to sell more than 0 each month. Your bonus can be 0 or greater than 0. So that's fair. Commission percentage and so on. Most of these are very sensible things to have. It's just that they're not built into the data type itself. You might need to expand your data definitions to indicate what's allowable data within that table. I'm going to skip the permissions for now for the sake of time, but I mentioned earlier you may get audits for where you need to provide access based on users and permissions to tables. There are DMVs here that you can use to get that information rather than just taking a screenshot. And I'll switch. Any other questions? I'll mention these briefly. I won't demo them. There are some older stored procedures, SP_help, that can give you some information about these. I said I wasn't going to demo this. I'll demo one of them. Sales order detail. So sales order detail is a table. It tells you here. It also gives you the column information in order. It doesn't actually list the order. You'd have to go by the row number here, but it gives you data types. It'll give you the sizes, the lengths. If you have numbers that are smaller, it'll tell you how many digits they have, more or less. You can also see further down if it's got an identity column. Indexes that you might have on the table will be listed here. And they'll also list constraints, including foreign keys, and they'll tell you which tables they reference. So that's available as well. If you were working on something prior to SQL Server 2005, you would have to rely on these SP helps to get that information. All right. And lastly, these property functions, a lot of them have been superseded by the DMVs. Things like for database information, you can just query sys.databases and so on and basically get the same kind of information. But one area that's very helpful is if you wanted to get information about your server instance. I'll just run these real quick. So here I have a server name property that has this double @ sign in front of it, but I can also use the server property function and pass in the machine name parameter here, or the parameter value, and they turn out to be the machine name is just the name of the machine. It's not the actual instance name. In this case, I have a named instance named Hobbs. But I can also get which edition of SQL Server I'm running by using the edition parameter, and whether it's been patched. If it was a service pack, it would indicate an SP here. If I have a cumulative update, it would list the cumulative update down here. And if I needed the knowledge base article for that update, it would be listed here on Microsoft's site. I can also get the data path and the log path for my instance. And I think there's about 30 or so of these properties that you could get at the server level. And this is on the documentation page on Microsoft Learn if you wanted to get all of them. But it's nice that it'll give you certain information that, instead of having to go into, if you had a number of different servers, instead of right-clicking And then going here and getting all of that information, you can just query it. It's just a little bit verbose, but it gives you the information you're looking for. And I think I've got to go to another slide. Okay, still no questions. Okay, you're either all asleep or I'm explaining this better than I've ever explained it before.
I think you're explaining it very well.
All right, thank you. All right, that won't last. Well, let's see now. Let's see if we can keep the momentum going. Let me do backup and restore history. So I'm hoping this has some data in it, because normally I take some backups during the presentation to repopulate this. I'm not sure I'll be able to do that because we only have 40 minutes left. Okay, I do have a backup here. For the database administrators in the audience, there's times when you might need to look at your backup history and compare, let's say, how long it took certain backups to run. You might see instances where backups suddenly start taking longer and need to investigate, or backups suddenly got larger. You don't know why. For instance, someone might have done some index maintenance, rebuilt an index, and it generated a lot of transaction log. Your transaction log backups suddenly got larger than they typically were. And you would be able to see that through this backup set table here in MSDB. When you use backups, they will generate a row if you create a new backup. And there's some columns here, and I think I can scroll over here a little bit. So a lot of other stuff that you don't really need, but when we get to, again, apologies for my trackpad. I should have found a better way to format this. So in this case, this backup was made by me, and this is the domain name. It's just my desktop name. But it gives you information about which database was backed up, which will come along here. For log sequence numbers, this helps you associate a full database backup or different database backups based on their log sequence numbers, which is in essence your point in time. If you had to go and do a point in time restore, these columns would help you out with constructing the sequence in which you'd want to restore these backups. So in case, for instance, some utilities will back up, they'll include the date and the time when the backup was made in the name. If those backups are made and they don't include it, you can use these LSN columns to construct the correct sequence and restore the backups in the correct sequence. You have the dates when the backup started and when it finished, so you can just compare the two to get how long it ran. And then a little further, you'll actually get the name of the database that was backed up. So when you go to restore it, you'll know the original name. You could also rename the database when you go to restore. But you can at least find out the original name of the database and also the original machine name where the backup originated. So if you had a large, either log shipping or some other kind of consolidated database or server where you wanted to restore from different places, you can actually get this information from the backup set. And you can also get this within the backup file itself. This is actually a clone of what's in the backup when the file is made. And there's a few more things here. It tells you about whether it's got a password on it and so on and so forth. And it is correlated to a restore history table. And this will tell you when a database was restored. And hopefully it still has the history of when I restored this. It does not. I apologize. But if you restore a database on this here, you can query this table directly. Again, if your touchpad lets you do that. Okay, so I haven't restored anything since I did this demo last, and there's no data there, so I will have to improve this demo later. It does similar things to what you saw with backup set. You'll see a restore date, destination database name. So if I do restore AdventureWorks to, say, AdventureWorks 2, the Wrath of Khan, I would see AdventureWorks 2, the Wrath of Khan, and the destination database name. Joining restore history to backup set allows me to see the actual original database name compared to the destination database name. So that's why I'd have that listed here from backup set, the original database name. But you would see the restore date, whether it was a log backup or a differential backup or a full backup, and how large the backup was. So this is where, again, I think for the sake of time, I'm going to have to skip this demo. I apologize. But there is, if you have an AdventureWorks handy, you could probably do this backup yourself. You can do a backup here, and then you'd see the changes in the backup set and the backup media family tables here. I'll move on from this. And if there's any questions, please ask.
Yeah, so there is one question.
I can't hear you. I just lost.
Oh, sorry, I just somehow clicked mute on mute again. So
Okay.
the one question is, any alternative for SP help text that retains the formatting too?
That's a good question. You can get the subsets of the SP help output. You can construct your own procedure and then just have it return multiple result sets. That's not hard to do. If you wanted to, you could take a look at the source code for SP help. In fact, I might have a demo of that coming up, where you can actually view the text that's in there and use that as a guideline. The only thing I'd warn against is a lot of the SP underscore system procedures that Microsoft built in, a lot of them are really, really old. There's a lot of just archaic statements in them, and it just might be confusing. I leave that to your judgment. If I get to an example where I can show that, then I'll demonstrate what I'm talking about. But I'd say yes, you could do that. There's no magic to it. It just has multiple result sets. It'll just say select A from table 1, select B from table 2. They just all appear one after the other. And then when you run them in here, you can only do SP help. If I just run this by itself, you'll get multiple outputs. So without any parameters, it's basically giving me all of the views, all of the tables. Yeah, constraints. It's basically giving me sys.objects while I'm in AdventureWorks. It's telling you what kind of object it is here. Now, if I give it the name of a table or a stored procedure, it will customize the output based on whether it's a table or a stored procedure. Yeah, it's doable. There's probably a sys.dmv of some kind that might be better for you. These are not going to be maintained or updated by SQL Server. They're just there for backwards compatibility. And I think the new SYS DMVs are probably the better source for what you're looking for, because that's where most of what SP help and all that will get the information from. They'll get them from the the sys.dmv sources. Let me take that out. Let's see. All right, let me go back to slide job steps. Hopefully that will have some data in them. So let me see if that's available here. Jobs and job history. So in addition to backup information, the MSDB database also is a repository for SQL agent jobs and some replication information, log shipping information. In the case of sys jobs, I have only one job here, which is that standard sys policy purge history job. So I'm just looking at my enabled jobs here. I'm joining to sysjob steps, and I can see that this purge history has 3 steps. That is verifies automations enabled, purge history, erase phantom system health. And you can see that this job has different systems. 2 of the statements are SQL, the other one is PowerShell. And then you can actually see the command for those that are command-related job steps. So this would be the bit of SQL that it runs. It runs that stored procedure in this step, and then this is a PowerShell script. And then after that, I'll also have the history of when this job ran, which would be this bottom query here. And right now, I didn't highlight again because my touchpad sucks. All right. Don't breathe. Here we go. We approach the sysjob history carefully as to not startle it. But you can join the jobs themselves, get the job name, and you can also get history information rather than having to say go into here, clicking on SQL agent, which I don't have. I'm on the Express edition. That probably explains why there's no job history here. So if I did this on an instance that supported it, you might see job history here as to when it last ran. All right. So that and some other administrative stuff is available in the MSDB database. So they don't necessarily appear, they just look like regular tables because they store this information on disk like normal stuff, just that this data is populated by system processes within SQL Server. You might be able to insert data directly into them, but it's not advised. Just let it be there and let it run its jobs and its stuff and work the way it's intended. And go back to, well, let's see if there's any questions. Nope. All right. So some of the better uses of DMVs are things that were written by other people. You've probably, I'd ask if you were in person to raise hands, who has heard of Glenn Berry? He is known as Dr. DMV. And he has a bunch of exceptionally useful queries that use the DMVs to get some information that you'd want if you were troubleshooting or simply auditing your server for performance reasons. I probably have a good demo of Glenn's queries that I'll do in a minute. I also want to mention Kimberly Tripp because she has this really good SP help index procedure that is much better than the built-in SP help index procedure. And this is for where you want to get into finer grain detail as to say how much space your indexes are taking up, things like that. There are some certain things, I think they've improved some of the output from the DMVs for things like included columns, how deep your actual index is, how many levels there are in your index, things like that. And she has a company that she started back in the mid to late 90s called SQL Skills. So you can also go to SQLskills.com. They have tons of amazing information on that. And you'll see a lot of DMV related queries there. And again, I'd ask people who are using SP Who is active, and that would be hopefully most of you. And that was a utility that Adam Mechanic originated. And he has now open sourced it, or at least he's opened it up for free download. And it's being maintained by other people. I don't remember if anyone can contribute to it. But this is, I say that this is better than sliced bread. And normally I'd use it all the time. My current job, I'm not able to use it in certain places, unfortunately, due to regulatory reasons. But it's fantastic for telling you what's happening on a server at that moment. You can get the actual statement someone's running, how many locks. I don't believe I'll be able to demo this only because, again, it's difficult to set this up in advance. So I apologize for that. But if you're not using SPU as active, you should start. And I'm sure most of you have heard of Brent Ozar. He has his first responder kit that has the SP Blitz procedures. They are also really, really useful. And they cover a lot of different areas, things like what you have in your procedure cache, being able to analyze index information to tell you if an index is used or not. The last one is kind of a historical oddity. If you wanted to look it up, Tim Ford actually created a periodic table, and he had DMVs where all of the slots where the elements would normally appear. But I don't think he's updated it since, so it's 10 years at least since he's updated it. But it is interesting. I don't know that you can you can actually print it out at a readable size. I think you'd have to print it like 10 or 12 feet across before you could make it out. So it's kind of just there for kind of educational purposes. All right. Any questions about these? Because I'll be able to demo some of these in addition to some other things that I put together.
So far, so good. No questions so far.
Okay. All right, let's see what we got here. Let me start with the Glenberry thing. And I mentioned earlier, you saw the server property function, and Glenn went through basically all of I think this is all the parameters that server property supports. But you can see things like the server collation, the process ID that it's running under Windows. Let me just query this stuff here real quick. So you just get it all as separate columns. I have an instance name, so this is my Hobbs instance. It is not a cluster. Here's the physical name of the computer. Let's see, Express Edition, cumulative update 10. Here's the version number. Breaks out all of the version numbers into major, minor, and so on. Let's see, the KB article. So everything about your server, rather than having to go through, right-clicking on Object Explorer and trying to figure it out, it gives you all of this information in a query. And this is very nice to put into, say, a spreadsheet for documentation, and he has corresponding spreadsheets for these queries that you see here. He'll give them a number. So this is query number 3, server properties. He has a spreadsheet listed as query number 3. And he has also augmented that by adding some notebooks where you could run these queries and then store the data in the notebook. And then you don't actually have to copy and paste from SSMS. It's right there. The query and the data that you get from the query are in the same notebook. He has one here for querying the backup set, the information I showed you earlier per database when it was last backed up. And as you can see, I'm a bad DBA on this instance. I don't back up my databases. So I should get fired for doing this right here. But that's the kind of thing that you can get from a simple query with just a few joins. And that way you can now, again, put this into some documentation, make this a regular report in case you have requirements to indicate how often backups are taken. You could even rewrite this in a way to say, hey, this database hasn't been backed up in a while. And you can check it against the oldest of these or the most recent of these. So in this case, I should get an email telling me you haven't backed up your databases. We get down to query 68, missing index warnings, and I don't believe this will show anything because I haven't done any queries. Yeah, okay. So in this case, they're not returning any data, but at least it's giving you some information about if you have query plans, you have cached query plans, and you're actually checking the plan XML and looking for the text of missing index. There are other DMVs that can give you missing index details. So this is, he says here, this could take time on a busy instance. But if you wanted missing index details, there's basically sys.dmdb missing indexes, something like that. You can get similar information. Or you could go to the next query in the demo that queries those DMVs directly to give you missing index information. And because I didn't run any queries that need missing indexes, it hasn't generated any entries on this. But yeah, here we go. Missing index groups, group stats, and so on, missing index details. If you were to see a missing index warning and you right-click on the query plan and say missing index details, it's pulled directly from this DMV here. And I think I'll leave that for, this gives you some idea as to what's available in CPU utilization by database. Let's see. Query stats. So all my queries are, let's see, about half of them have been in AdventureWorks, a little less than half. So this actually can look for how much CPU is used per database, and you can just do the math that he does here, and then it ranks how much CPU your databases have used, and so on. Here's a wait stats query in case you want to see what your server's waiting on. And let me run this real quick. Generally, this would be where you'd start checking for items based on how much wait time they are consuming on the server, meaning the server can't proceed because it's waiting on this particular statistic here. I'm not sure about SOS work dispatcher, but you might see things like page IO latches. A page IO latch would mean that you actually have an IO issue. Your disk is unable to keep up with your query. You might also have heard of CX packet. Those would be indications of parallelism things. And then if you see a lot of waits in these particular areas, you can start looking at queries that are experiencing these waits and see if you can tune them or change them to reduce those waits. I'm going to move on from this. Any questions about these? And this is, again, you can go to Glenn's site there. I would highly recommend. You can go, he updates them probably about once or twice a year. He also has versions going back to SQL Server 2005. I believe he's only maintaining from 2017 onwards because I think that he's not maintaining them for unsupported versions anymore. They're just historical. All right. Well, now, let's see if we have... Let me see if I can get something from Brent's procedure here. Not on this instance. Okay. Sorry about that. Let me close that one. This one, oh, I don't have the AdventureWorks large database here. All right. Sorry, can't demo this one. Apologies for this. I had to reconfigure this for today's demonstration. Let's see. Query execution. This one I should be able to do. This is a modification of one that Glenn Berry had, which would be the top 5 max worker things. Basically, these would be the queries that are using the most CPU. And I have, let's see. So this query, it ran once, but it used the most, had the longest worker time, meaning it took the most CPU. And if I go and click on the XML here, as you can see, it can return XML. When I click on it, SQL Server recognizes it as a query plan, and it will now show up in the query plan diagram that you see here. I could then right-click and actually view the XML. And then this would be what you'd see in that column. It's just a shortcut when you click on an XML, a show plan XML in Management Studio, it will open it up in the graphical viewer here. But this is basically the XML. And then when you actually go into the query here, the lines and the properties that you see, if I hover over here, all of these things that you see in this yellow box are represented in the XML of the actual plan, and it reformats it for you. As you move over other elements, you'll also get details on that particular operation and all that. Let's see. And it's, as I mentioned, it's all in here. There's some also details in here that do not appear in the graphical plan if you wanted to dig deeper into the query. And I have a similar query down here that actually looks at the text of the query. I don't know why it gives me the top 15, but I can look at individual statements within the query to see, oops. Let's see here. I have the SP underscore help procedure here. So you saw me run this earlier, and then I can see the actual execution statistics on how long it ran, how many times it ran. It's over here a little bit. Yeah. So worker time is a CPU, measure of CPU, how many times it was executed. I can also look at physical reads, logical reads and writes, or logical writes. Okay. So this is where I can start looking for different dimensions of how much CPU did it use, how much IO did it use, There's also, I go a little further here, elapsed time. I believe it will have memory information over here. Here we go. If you get into a little bit deeper query analysis, you can start looking at memory grants. You can start comparing which queries use the most memory. In case that becomes an issue, you can start working on reducing their memory footprint. And these are also cumulative as time goes on. So if I run SP help again, this would get incremented, or the execution count would get incremented. And then it would also update the other statistics based on the last query. So it's very, very helpful, sysdm exec query stats. If you start seeing long-running queries and things like that, you can get some aggregated statistics. One of Glenn's queries, it's similar to this. It basically looks at the top 5 CPU consuming queries. You can then investigate them one by one and start tuning them if you need better performance. Let me see. Any questions? You can then use Poor SQL to format it for you. So not something I can hang on the wall in the living room. No, you can print out the DMV. If you're talking about Tim's DMV periodic table, yeah, you can print it out. You just can't read it unless you print it that big to take up your wall. It was pretty tiny the last time I looked at it. Okay, let me see if this query works like I expect it to. Okay, so here's a demo. I can show you about index usage, and this is if you use the SP Blitz index utility from Brent Ozar, it will look at this usage stats amongst other things, and it will tell you whether an index is used or not. In this case, I'm looking at any index usage for AdventureWorks. And what I'll do is, as you can see, I have no usage stats for anything in AdventureWorks. I will select the top 100 rows from sales order header, and when I query this again, you'll see that it accessed index ID 1, and that would be the clustered index of the sales order header table. And it tells you the last time it was scanned with the date here, and it would also indicate the number of scans, in this case, just one scan. And if I run this a second time, and that should increment to 2. Yep, and the date would be updated. And then this is the basis for, Brent querying and saying, hey, give me all the indexes on this table, give me all of their usage stats. And if the index is not being used and there's no usage stats, you could consider maybe dropping that index, especially if it doesn't have any seeks or scans or user lookups. If these were all 0 and you see user updates here, it basically says, hey, I'm only writing to this index. I'm not using it for queries. And it's probably a good candidate for possibly dropping it because it's not a useful index. And he has his own formula for calculating how useful it might be based on the ratio between reads and writes. And I think that's what this query does here. Yeah, it adds up the usages here. And I believe, yeah, this doesn't return anything. Yeah, because I don't have any non-zero activity. So if I was to update sales order header and change things, you would see other indexes that just get written to, but they don't have any reads on them. All right, I'm going to close this one too, because this is unfortunately going to take too long. Let me see. What else do I have? We have about 10 minutes. Useful Rob scripts. Not too sure about that. Let me run my last access script. What I did here was an elaboration on checking the index usage stats. And what I do is I actually look for these user scans and user updates. And then I change it to a format where I can now say, hey, when was this database last accessed? Either a read or a write. and I can query all of my databases for that. And let me just take out this where clause here. So now what I can do is go across all of my databases and see, hey, I haven't accessed the master database or the model database. The only thing I've touched today is MSDB and AdventureWorks. I can then start looking at when the database was created, when the server last started, and when I actually captured this data. And I've used something like this to help identify databases we're not using anymore. The idea is to keep track of this historically, so if you reboot your server, you can keep a history and basically say, hey, we haven't accessed this database in 3 months. Can we drop it? You know, someone inevitably says no, but at least you can document the fact that people are not using these databases. We don't need them anymore. Because that's usually a question people ask is the database being used? Is this table being used? And that comes from index usage stats. It's one way of making that determination. It may not be the best way, but it's one way of determining usage or non-usage. Let's see. Stats and indexes. And this, oh, this thing hates me. There we go. Let's see. This is a little different. This is a query against the objects in your database and the statistics on those particular objects. In this case, I have a function called statsDate, and this tells me the last time the statistics were updated for this particular table and this particular statistic. So some of these will be indexes. Some of them will be auto-generated statistics. That's a naming scheme for an auto-generated statistic. But if I was to wanted to know, hey, my performance is really bad, and I go and take a look and see that my statistics are, in this case, years out of date, because I don't query and auto-update the statistics on AdventureWorks that frequently. But in one of your production databases, here we go. So this one, based on, I guess, a run that I did not too long ago, it automatically updated this statistic on sales order header. Let me see. Yeah. I don't know which column this is, but it was an auto-created statistic, and whenever I ran that query, it updated the stats, and that gives clues to the query optimizer on which access methods and which indexes might be useful to answer a query. That's one version. Let's see. Will we be able to get a copy of the queries at the end of the demo? Yes, I will be emailing them to the organizers, and they can make them available to the group. I'm not going to do VLFs. Discover constraints. No, I think I'll skip that one. This example, I don't have enlarged one. SP stats. Yeah, let me run this. I don't think it'll prove useful. Oh, I didn't create it. All right, give me a second. Let me run it. All right, SP stats. Doesn't have anything here. Let me go to AdventureWorks, SP stats. So building on what I demonstrated before is now I can generate this output for all of the objects in my database, in this case, AdventureWorks. So this is every object with a statistic ID, its name, when it was last updated, which column it refers to. In this case, I have an indicator to say, is this statistic on a large object column? Because there are times when I don't want to update the statistics for a blob column. I'm happy to just leave it, or I have to take a scheduled time to update it, only because when I wrote this, I had databases with hundreds of gigabytes of blobs, and it was a burden to run it. It also shows you how many rows have been modified since then. So if you don't have any modified rows on your statistic, you don't need to update it. And I'm not seeing any modified rows here. Well, here we go. Database log ID. And I'm wondering if this is, nope, it's database log. So in here, in this case, I have 1,500 rows, 1,487 of them have been modified since this was last updated. So here I could run, let me see. I generated an update statistics statement here, and now I can just update this one statistic. I also have options here with full scan, and it also gives me the details on here's when it was last updated, here's the total row count, here's the modified row count, here's the column in question. So this was a nice utility script that I've used when I had to do manual statistics updates. We had, large tables where we weren't updating enough rows for the auto update to kick in, and it was also only updating the standard 20% sample. So it's a long script, but I'll send it to the organizers, and you can use it if you like. I would recommend you test this first before you use it. This is also, you may want to reconsider this because if you put this in master, you may not want to use this to make it a system object. I should probably take that out. All right. I think only got 5 minutes. So let me see, are there any questions other than that? Let me see. Permissions. Yeah, let's just rip it. Let me see if this does anything useful. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that you can get permissions informations, let's say if you have an audit. So we have server principals. These will be your logins, your server logins, and then it joins to a server permission DMV, and then it'll actually indicate what permissions that login has. And some of these are the certificate level built-in users, but you can see here, I have a couple of logins here. I have myself, this is my Windows login on this machine. I also have this SQL login I use for a different demo, and they have connect SQL server permissions, so they're allowed to connect to the server. If they were not allowed to connect to the server, this would have been an even shorter demo. We have some system level things here. You can see that they are NT authority, NT service. These are basically the built-in accounts. And then we have some built-in system things here that can connect to SQL. And lastly, we have this public server role that has view any database. And then finally, of course, we have the dreaded SA server login that you can't do anything about. That has role permissions here. So we have the role membership based on server login, which roles they belong to, and the names of those roles. And as you can see, most of the stuff here belongs to sysadmin. Since these are built-in system ones, you can't change or you don't want to change. But this would be, if you're adding individual users to sysadmin, it's probably worth revisiting that policy because it's a security hole, and that's something I demo in another presentation. We get now into database level permissions, and these are very similar. They're just database principals and database permissions. And then you can see at the different granularity, they have database level access to view column key encryptions, master keys, connect to the database. You have individual objects that they have select permission. So the public role has select permission to internal partitions. Why the heck is that even in there? I don't know. Most of these seem to be system objects, so they're basically just default permissions that are created for the public role all the way down. And then finally, I get into database roles and who belongs to those roles. So the DBO user is a member of the DB owner role. So if you had real users in a database other than AdventureWorks, you run this query, and then you can give this to, again, whatever auditing or other security people that need to understand or know what the database and server access is for your users. And I think with that, I don't believe I have any more demos. All right, let me go back to, I can do one more demo. Let's see. All right. That one, no, that's not going to work. Useful Rob scripts. This one, yeah, let me demo this one. If you've ever had to wonder, I know Andy Yun had a stored procedure he published because he had views that were querying views that were querying other views, and he basically was just spiraling all the way down. And there are some DMVs that can actually help you with dependent objects. And I think one of these DMVs references the other, so you really only need one. But if I go into AdventureWorks and I want to see which objects reference something, so in this case, this check constraint references this table. Let's see, we have this function down here references human resources employee. This is a somewhat simplified version of the query, but if I were to give this particular object name and I'd want to know, hey, what objects reference, I hate this thing here. If I wanted to see, hey, get stock references product inventory, bill of materials references these two tables, there's ways of writing this so that I can actually give it a parameter to, is that here? Yes, it is. Here we go. Let me do this in the correct database here, spref. And was I smart and did something down here? I probably didn't do it. I didn't do it. Oh, hang on. Oh, SP plan. Let me go get the plan too. All right. In the 2 minutes we have remaining, I'll go into AdventureWorks. So I use these references via this stored procedure. And I run this reference on accounting end date, and it's not giving me anything. And it's not giving me anything for this. Okay, so I broke something, but okay, it would basically run that query that you saw here, but only for the one particular object you're interested in. So it would be a filter on the output that you got from this query up here. And it basically tells you, here's your object, here are all the things that your object references, and then later on it would also show you, here are all the objects that reference your object. This is only from a point of, say, stored procedures referencing tables, views referencing other stuff. It doesn't do foreign keys yet. However, there are DMVs that can give you, like you saw earlier, check constraints are listed here. Foreign keys, I don't believe, show up in these dependencies, but they do show up in sys.foreign keys. You could augment this script to include foreign keys. Then you could see tables, how they are referenced by foreign keys and so on. And you can incorporate this here. And then you could use this if you wanted to in a diagramming tool to say, hey, A, what is A linked to? And then you can construct that diagram from this source data. And with that, as we are just over 1 p.m., I will close this. And are there any last questions?
I don't see any further. Okay, so will we be able to get a copy of queries? You would be emailing us a copy of queries, Rob, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I'll send them via email. I don't have them on GitHub at the moment, and I don't believe I could do that in a reasonable time. So I'll just send them via email.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. So once we have that and the recording of this session, we would upload that to our YouTube channel. And then there will be, and yeah, as Deb mentioned, he'll share with all the attendees. So with that, thank you so much, Rob. Excellent presentation, expertly delivered. We truly appreciate your time.
Hey, Suvi and Theo, if you guys want to hang in there.
I have another meeting, so I need to rush.
Okay, cool, no problem. Take care.
I can stay on for a few minutes too if anyone wants me.
We always want to, but